My name's Callie Pruett, and I'm the Executive Director of Appalachians for Appalachia, and I'm the co-host of Appodlachia.
Tell us a little bit about what you guys do.
So, A for A, for short, for Appalachians for Appalachia, we are working hard to change the narrative of what it is to be an Appalachian person and what it is to live here and thrive here. Young people are leaving in droves. West Virginia is one of the few states that has seen a population decline in the last decade. We're seeing lots of neighborhoods and stores and streets that are dying out. And that's something that many of us are passionate about not happening. And so A for A is invested in creating the kind of vibrant communities where people can come together, because we believe that great community is the opposite of addiction. When you are able to come together with your neighbors, in music and in culture and art, that's something that's life-changing. So A for A is putting on free concerts all over the region. We have policy priorities that we are pushing for. We've had legislative wins even this year, unrelated to addiction, but still really important to the region. But we know that people my age, I grew up, I was in high school at the height of the opioid epidemic. My mom was a drug abuse counselor, and I remember those days when she would walk in the house and just like her face was gaunt. She looked like a different person because one of her clients was in the hospital or one of them had overdosed. And I don't know if you'd ever seen Dope Sick, but there's a scene in there that really like resonated with me and woke up all of these memories of just community members getting together and saying, what the heck should we do? And that's kind of what we're responding to, is that our youth have seen this depiction of Appalachia that is not what we experience or what we want to build for our kids. And so A for A is focused on making sure that we are living in and building thriving communities.
That's great. How did you come to be here with Hope for the Hills and Healing Appalachia?
So we knew that this was an event that we wanted to be involved in. The caliber of the folks who are here and who are represented in our region is unmatched, and so we wanted to be part of it. And we also knew that there is a huge audience who's going to be here who maybe are considering leaving the region because of the way that it's depicted or because they've lived through such a crisis as the opioid one. If you have friends die, you don't really want to live in your hometown anymore. You don't want to live in the house next to where your friend OD'd. And so we knew that there was an audience here that we needed to reach, because if Appalachia is going to be a thriving community in the future, then we need to keep our kids, we need to keep the folks who are now seeing a college education as a ticket out of here. I was at WVU yesterday. I was speaking to a class of undergraduate freshmen, and I asked them who all is planning to stay in Appalachia, and probably like 3 out of 25 hands went up. I asked who's considering staying, another 3. And then I was like, who sees this as their ticket out? Deuces up, getting out of here, and like most of the class shot up their hands. And that's not what I want to see. I want to see our kids saying, Appalachia's worth investing in. It's worth building my life here, and we are more than the way that we've been depicted or the violence that's been inflicted upon us through the opioid epidemic.
What's the biggest misconception
about Appalachia? Wow. So I believe that people outside of Appalachia often view our accents as a sign of us being unintelligent. When I was in college, I had a professor who was like, you're great. I think you're going to do great things. Maybe you're going to do something in academia, but I got to tell you, you got to lose that accent or you won't be taken seriously. And I don't think that professor was a bigot. I think that he was passing on advice that he had been told that you had to be different. So I don't even know if there's this big misconception outside, like all of that is stereotyping. There's a misconception here that the chips on our shoulders, that means that we have to prove everybody else wrong. But that's not really what it is. There's inherent value in our culture and in our heritage and in who we are. And the proving them wrong will come, and we just have to believe. I don't want any other kid to experience that. I got rid of my accent, and it's the biggest regret of my life. And because I was 18, I took his advice. I was like, he knows better than I do. He's trying to help me. And now I want to speak to our youth and say, you can be exactly who you are, and that is an important contribution to our world, and there's nothing wrong with our culture.
You can get it back. Just hang out with your old friends.
Yeah, my partner says that I code switch when I'm with my dad.
My wife does it. I can hear her in the other room, and I'm like,
Yeah, he's like, who is this coming out?
you were talking right as the camera was rolling about one of the exciting things about being here is meeting and hearing the stories of all the grassroots organizations that are working throughout the region in their own way for Appalachia and for drug addiction and so forth. Tell me a little bit about that, about the surprise of that and how that is changing.
Yeah.
It's a change in the region.
Yeah, so it's so inspiring to be here. I've had people walk up to the tent today and be like, I've got this small program in my county, like, let's find ways to partner. And I think that these kinds of opportunities allow us to network, to see what else is out there. There's no more doubling of efforts. People are doing that work and they're passing it around to everybody. Nobody is worried about looking on somebody else's paper because that paper is being handed directly to you. Here's what we've learned. Here's our lessons. Here's how you can do better. And I think that's how it's changing. Not only are there small organizations doing the really hard, beautiful work that is often thankless of being in their towns and making those towns slightly better every day, slightly more exciting to be in, slightly more just a place that young people feel like they can make their life there. And I think that's incredibly difficult work. It takes bravery to say, all right, I'm going to put my livelihood on the line. I used to be a lobbyist in D.C. I was a science policy lobbyist, and I moved back to Charleston, and I want to be here because Appalachia is my home, and I'm tired of people saying that I could never build a life here. And that's what every single person here is saying. They're all saying there's hope here. There's passion here. There's fire in every single holler and cove in Appalachia. And there's, I believe, a renaissance happening in Appalachia when it comes to recovery, but also when it comes to arts and culture and music. And that's making life here so much more beautiful. And we're not taking what we used to take from these big companies coming in. We know what an extraction economy has done to us and what it looks like, and we're rebuilding in a better and smarter and more connected way.
Fire in the holler.
Yeah.
I like that. It's a good t-shirt.
Yeah, I love that.
Dave, I miss anything?
I can think of.
You can tell you're to the point, which is great.
Thank you. I've had a lot of media training.
What else would you want to say?
Has there been an arc in abuse, or have you seen, what has the drug problem done in terms of growth? Is it getting worse, getting better? Is it?
I think it's getting better. I really do. I think it's getting better.
Despite COVID?
I think it's getting better because the stigma is going away. People aren't saying that people with addiction have a moral deficit. And that's a huge change, I feel like, from when I was in high school. People would say, they would kind of write off people who had addiction as having made bad choices or having just not been able to control themselves. And I think that it's better because the community understands and is more empathetic toward addiction. And I think that generally that makes addiction more of a conquerable problem. If the community can rally around folks and can say, I understand that this isn't something you're doing because you want to. So many people don't want to so badly. And that's what I think is why it's more hopeful now than it ever has been.
Is that education or experience or both?
Both. I really do. I think, when you go to high school, I had friends who overdosed in high school. I remember, like I said, my mom would come home with clients overdosing. I remember just like the sheer panic of not knowing what was happening to us. It's like having a disease and you don't have the diagnosis yet, but you're living with the problem. And now we have a diagnosis, and we can face it together. And I think that that's what Appalachia is doing. That's why Healing Appalachia is so important, because it takes all of us coming together and saying, this isn't a problem that we are going we're not going to take this laying down anymore. We're all going to stand together and be empathetic and hopeful. And that's why I think this is such an important event.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I think, this is the height of it. It seems like it's been peaking for over 10 years.
Yeah.
When the opioid crisis peaked, and then when that valve was sort of shut off,
Mm-hmm.
finally, it turned to heroin, turned to meth.
Yeah.
And then now you've got fentanyl.
Fentanyl, yeah.
As fentanyl and meth sort of fighting for the souls of those who are still battling
Yeah.
demons. I guess we'll follow up with a little bit. How has COVID affected you guys as far as trying to enact the policies that you're trying to enact?
Delay after delay. It's really impacted us because it's just harder to connect with people when you can't be with them. And COVID has really impacted our growth. We started in basically right before the pandemic in 2019. And, I think that not only did that make funding harder to get, and I think this is an important statistic. Appalachia gets about $41 in philanthropic funds per capita. The rest of the country gets around $450 per capita in philanthropic funds. And so COVID made that even worse because people were focused on high density areas to give that funding to. And so I think that we are battling not only the stereotypes of the rest of the country, the callousness of many, many organizations and philanthropic funds that don't see this as a worthy cause, who kind of see Appalachian people as expendable. And then you're also fighting because there's a fatigue of crises going on right now. And so fighting saying Appalachia needs money and we need money to do this work specifically, it's a hard case to make when so many of these groups have those issues. And so a lot of our work, our slogan is disrupt the story. A lot of our work is simply narrative change, and making sure that when we are talking to the press, when we are talking to people outside of the region and to these philanthropic agencies, that we are making sure that our narrative is telling a totally different story than what they understand and what they have believed in the past to be true.
Which leads me to, I spent a lot of time also working in Eastern Kentucky, which is very similar.
Yeah.
And when I talk to the older generations, they're defeated.
Yeah.
They've almost given up. They've been beaten down so long.
Yeah.
Before, they've been abused. They've given up on all politicians. They've given up almost on hope.
Yeah.
And I think they've tried not to pass that on, but I think it's inherent that they will. As children, you see your parents, you see them despondent, and just feeling like they've tried and they just can't beat it.
Yeah.
How has that affected you? In your change, I know you're trying to reach younger people
Mm-hmm.
to enact the change, but how is it with the older generations?
Yeah. The most valuable resource that we have in Appalachia right now is hope. And unfortunately, that's a scarce resource, but it's also renewable. And that's what we're trying to tap into is when you get a group of young people together, I'm never cool around people my age, but older people love that I'm so enthusiastic about Appalachia. They see someone who has, maybe not had the easiest time. I grew up poor. I remember my mom putting $2 of gas in the car so that we could get to school, and that's all we had. And I think that I agree. There's so much loss of hope, but music and community is what renews that hope. And so that's why events like Healing Appalachia are so important. And I do think that, and I may be in the minority here, but I think that our older generation can also be reached. And I think that they can be reached by their kids not feeling like they have to abandon the place where they grew up. There's a lot of shame in the older generations for even raising your children here. And I don't want any parent to feel like raising their child in Appalachia was a bad decision, because I used to think that I needed to succeed despite where I came from, but I am successful because of where I came from. And I want more people to understand that and feel that pride, because there's so much here to be proud of.
Did you ever watch Anthony Bourdain's shows? Did you see the one he did in West Virginia?
I did not, actually. I didn't even know he came to West Virginia.
He did, and I don't know what part of the state he was in, but they were young. You need to find it, because they were young people who moved back here from like New York or someplace. They were chefs, and they came back. They were from here to the roots, and they wanted to celebrate Appalachia and their food. They're like, they grew up embarrassed about where they were from, partly from accent, just partly poverty, and they went away, and finally, later on as adults, they realized, I was lucky to be from here. I came from a very unique place with a great history, with a very unique set of, history, but also food history.
Yeah.
And so they said, we're going to come back and we're going to celebrate this, and they did. And I need to find out where they are, because I'd love to go to their restaurant.
Yeah.
What part of the state they were in. But anyway, it was very much exactly what you're doing, and I think you guys, hopefully they're still doing it, and you guys could hook up, because it was very cool.
Yeah,
They were
that's
doing
awesome.
The same thing, but through food.
I would love, yeah, that's amazing. We are trying also, we're just lifting up makers and creators and artisans that do that kind of work. Like we just did a big interview with the Appalachian forager, and she gave me a few tips, and I literally went out and I foraged for mushrooms and I cooked them, and we made a whole segment about it. And it's those kind of things. She's in her 20s doing this, and there's a whole movement. Salt rising bread is an art that was almost lost completely.
A lot of what the couple were doing were this, and they were talking to their relatives who were older, who were almost embarrassed or thought that it was embarrassing, shameful, but they were ashamed of it because they were so poor they had to cook with just corn, or with just what they had.
There's a stigma around it.
Right, very much a stigma, and they were like, no, Aunt Josephine, or whatever it was. What you were doing was art.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. The thing that immediately brings to my mind is I used to eat a lot of Spam, because that's what we could afford, and that is really looked down on as a food that is untouchable by some segments of the population. And I used to get made fun of, but my mom said, she would always say, she was like, "You're eating." And she's like, "You're luckier than some kids, you're eating." And I think there are stigmas surrounding food in so many different, especially immigrant communities. There's an Indian immigrant community in Perry County, Kentucky. And I spoke with one of the members of that community who was raised in Hazard and used to get made fun of for the food that they brought. But that just goes to show that, I think that everybody is kind of in Appalachia is facing their own little battles, but that Appalachia, when we are together in community, that we can lift each other up and have amazing Indian food alongside a Spam taco or something.
Although
which are quite good, by the way. A Spam taco I will recommend.
Hot sauce.
Yes,
Yeah, hot,
you got it.
hot pico. Good?
Yeah.
Awesome. That was great.
Thank you. Yeah, awesome.
I-
Anytime.